We have the first details on Nintendo's next console. This is VGC, a video game podcast with me, Jordan Midler, Chris String, and Andy Robinson. Chris, you're back. You're now the most tenured guest on this legendary podcast. How you doing?
Oh, what a treat. I'm alright. How are you doing?
The most available guest.
At short notice.
Literally one of Britain's most available journalists. Yeah, I'm alright, man. Andy, how are you?
Yeah, I'm alright. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Good. I've got a minor bone to pick with you. See, the next time you're going to destroy the website and dominate the news for the week, you want to not do it on a Monday so I can actually help? Because I was just sitting there with my phone going ding, 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 ding.
Turn off your notifications, mate.
It'll be something minor. It'll be some Capcom results or something, and then I just see it on my phone and it's like, oh, by the way,
the PSN update, yeah.
Headline number one, Nintendo is targeting 2024 with the next gen console. This comes straight from VGC. Development kits for Nintendo's next console are now with key partner studios, with launch planned for next year, sources have told VGC. According to multiple people with knowledge of Nintendo's next-gen console plans, the company is likely to release new hardware during the second half of 2024 to ensure that it has ample stock available on day one to avoid the kind of shortages seen by PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series. Although specific details on the console are being kept closely guarded, those VGC spoke to indicated that the next-gen console would be able to be used in portable mode similar to Nintendo Switch. Two sources VGC spoke to also suggested that the console could launch with an LCD screen instead of the more premium OLED in order to bring costs down. I now go to the man of the hour, Andy Robinson. Take it from here. What do you know about Switch 2?
I mean, obviously, we covered this in a short kind of video / podcast earlier in the week. Chris Scullion and I. Yeah, I mean, you've pretty much summarised it, mate. I mean, development kits are with key partners. I mean, as I said earlier this year, this is something that I feel like is really going to start, kind of spewing all over the place. Kind of with the big shows coming up, with Tokyo Game Show especially, when I think Nintendo will kind of start broaden its kind of reach of developers that it's talking to. It didn't surprise me in the slightest that I put this story up and then kind of Eurogamer quickly kind of corroborated it. You had kind of Bloomberg kind of retweeting it as well, kind of suggesting that it's kind of on the money in terms of what they've heard. And also there's a fellow, I don't know if you know the influencer Nate the Hate, the Nintendo leaker.
I'm familiar.
So him and MVG, the kind of excellent Night Dive programmer, they did a video about this yesterday at the time of recording, and again they were saying a lot of the same stuff that I say in this report as well. I mean, some of the additional stuff that they added is also kind of on the money in terms of what I've been hearing as well. So it looks like, unsurprisingly, that it's going to be another portable machine. It's I guess the surprise is, I mean, Chris Dring here could probably touch on this a little bit. I actually think it's a little bit surprising that probably it's coming out later in the year, right, Chris?
I think a lot of people were expecting March because of what they did last time and it seemed to work. But actually, from a business perspective, Switch is like Switch. The results just come out today, right, for Switch, and sales are up for the console. They've just sold through 15 million, I think 18 million shipped of Tears of the Kingdom. Their games are still selling. Their audience is still engaged in the platform. It's still doing really, really well. You want to release your console when things are starting to dip. Now, we won't really know how the year's going to go for Nintendo until we get to Christmas. It's so important for them. It's important for everybody, but it's doubly important for Nintendo. But if Nintendo have an okay Christmas, then, launching in March, it feels a bit too soon. I think Christmas, it was how I would have. I'm not surprised by that news. Nintendo are good at surprising us, so I wouldn't have. But I'm not surprised that it would be the second half of the year, actually. I think looking at where that platform, how it's doing, it's not like the Wii U, which was dead by the time Switch had rolled into town. So it doesn't surprise me too much, but I think a lot of people would expect it. I think a lot of core fans are eager for a new console because the technology is a bit old now and they're eager for it. But I think from a Nintendo's actual audience, which is families, and that's still so hyper engaged and playing a machine all the time. So there's probably not that. But again, if Christmas is a poor Christmas, then it's probably a bit late But so it all depends on those last few months of the year for Nintendo. From a business perspective, ultimately, it all comes down to when the games are ready. If they don't have games ready for March, they shouldn't launch it in March. That's the best time to release your consoles, when you have something to release it with. And if there's like a Mario or Pokemon or something planned for the second half of the year, that's when you put it out.
So, Chris, do you expect there to be any kind of... Well, I presume there will be some trail-off support for Nintendo Switch, but do you see it being a case of the next Mario, the next Pokemon being on both platforms because the install base is so huge, or do they just go straight to whatever the Switch 2 is called?
Well, I guess it depends on the backwards compatibility question. Here's the thing. I'm surprised. I don't know, Andy, if you're hearing the same thing, but in Nintendo's report it says the same thing, that Metroid Prime 4 is still scheduled for the current platform. I would have thought that they would have moved that onto the next one. I think the challenge.
I heard that's going to be the last big Switch game, but again, like, unless I'm writing this on VGC in a news story, I'm not certain. I'm not near certain, but there was chatter that from people I was speaking to who did know about this stuff, that it would be the last kind of big Switch game.
Yeah, and what Nintendo like to do is they do like to get people to move from one thing to the other. They like you to upgrade. They like you to get, and if they keep putting games out on the Switch, they're not encouraging you to move on to that next machine. But they'll have data on things like the Switch audience is still, I think they've got 116 million active accounts at the minute on Switch, which is a huge number. But how many of those have come in the last 3 years? Are people who bought the machine back in 2017, are they still playing it? I suggest with Tears of the Kingdom maybe they are, but Nintendo will know based on that what they need to do with some of these games. I suspect if they're still working on Switch games, they might do a cross-generation thing. But actually Nintendo don't do it that much, do they? I mean, they did it with Tears of the Kingdom. And they do it with like the occasional big game at the end.
Breath of the Wild as well.
I meant Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild, Twilight Princess. They've done it with a game in the past.
Those felt more like PR exercises to me as well, like where they delayed the game so much that it would kind of be the ultimate blow if they then didn't release it on the last console. Like, it didn't feel like a strategic thing to me. It felt more like servicing their audience sort of thing.
Yeah, they made like Metro. Maybe that's what Metro Prime is. They've promised people it's going to be on Switch.
Yeah, they tend to do that, right? I guess the big question here, and the one that everyone seems to be talking about, is obviously backwards compatibility, which in my report I said is unclear, purely because there's a lot of contradicting information from people I spoke to, right? I mean, at the moment, a lot of my story is based on the fact that there are dev kits, right? There are certain things that people can pull from development kits, and those development kits, prototype development kits, usually they're missing big features that will be in the final machine, right? They're not based on final hardware. They haven't got the final features, etc., etc. So, from what I hear, it's not really clear, what's going on with that front. I was told since that at least one developer I spoke to who has a kit was told it does not have backwards compatibility. But again, that's not enough for me to run with that, because I've had others say that there is. The only kind of feeling I could get in terms of a broad consensus about what's going on is that it seems that Nintendo can do, like, if it doesn't have backwards compatibility, from what I'm hearing, it seems like that would be an objective decision. Like, Nintendo's decided not to do this because it wants you to buy, Mario Brothers for the 57th time. I mean, that's what, I spoke to you a bit about this, Chris, didn't I? That some of the people I was speaking to were saying that there was some concern around particularly the software attached for PS5, obviously backwards compatible machine, and that there was some pushback towards Nintendo from these specific publishers about backwards compatibility because of that, basically. That the concern was, well, it seems that lots of people bought PS5 and then just carried on playing their library or their upgrades or what have you.
Yeah, I think it's with that, though. I'm not entirely... you are seeing, I think... people buying fewer games generally, but I don't think that's necessarily the result of backwards compatibility. I think it's probably more likely that these games are just longer and the live service components to them, and then the subscription services attached to these as well. I think that's probably having a bigger impact upon buying habits than the fact that you can play a game. If you've got a new games console, you want to buy the new games, you want to play the new games, otherwise why'd you bother? Yeah,
but that's the thing, though, is that, I can emphasise with that theory somewhat, because and when I bought my Xbox Series X, or for example, I just sat and played all my old stuff, right?
Yeah, but that's because you had no choice.
But again, this feeds into everything. But that feeds into everything. If the Xbox Series X wasn't backwards compatible with past Xbox games, would they have launched it with bugger all? Probably not. So this feeds into everything. How many tosh games have you bought at a console launch because it's a new console and you want some new stuff, right? Loads and loads. The amount of tripe I bought on PS2 at launch.
Yeah,
Smuggler's Run.
Yes, Smuggler's Run. Yeah.
Yeah. I can go along with that.
Yes, we can all emphasise with that.
But it's not new. Like backwards compatibility isn't some new phenomena that's just cropped up, right?
The fact that the consoles are very iterative is right. Yeah. Like you don't really give a shit if your N64 doesn't play SNES games, but PS5 playing PS4, that's kind of a bigger deal because it's very iterative leap.
Yeah, I can sort of see it. I for me, it's weird. Nintendo's a little bit different to the other consoles because their audience is like. I've got a friend of mine who's she's got a Switch. She doesn't play much on it. They've got Mario Kart. The daughter loves Animal Crossing, and when I talked about the Switch too, she said, "What's going to be different? Why would I? What's wrong with the Mario Kart I've got?" And that's a thing that Nintendo face. That's one of the reasons they sort of have a novelty with each console is to sort of give people, oh, you've got to get this one. This one's controlled by motion controls. This one's got 3D. Like they like to create a reason for not gamers. We're happy with it looking.
Every
fast.
console needs a gimmick, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, if as a gamer, I'm perfectly happy with it just looking nicer and running faster, right? You know,
they need the gimmick to get the broader audience in, right? I was going to ask you this: is what are they going to be thinking about? In terms of launch of who they're kind of getting on board here, because it seems that Nintendo have had a whole ton of lessons learned over the past decade in terms of who they should be targeting their consoles to initially, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I thought the Switch was like a real. I don't know if they did it on purpose or not. I think they'll probably say they did, but it felt like a masterclass in how to launch a machine. In that they put the machine out. With Zelda, so they didn't do it with like a big. I mean, they did 1-2 Switch, but whatever. They didn't put it out with a big casual game. They went with a big hardcore title. Brought in those hardcore fans really strong right at the start. Then they released something every single month, and by the time it got to Christmas, just when they were going right, let's broaden out, let's get the families in. They had a lineup of games that included Zelda and Mario Kart and Splatoon and ARMS and Mario, and they just had this great lineup of games they could really go to town with. And then they kept releasing something every month because they're not. Interestingly, I find it fascinating. 7 years into the Switch, right, or into the 7th year now, and they still get barely any third-party support from the big publishers, right? You look at the slate on their latest report of what's coming up this year that they consider significant, and it's like 10 games. But Nintendo have been giving out a game every single month, and some of it's for hardcore players, some of it's for casual players. They've been doing this really good cadence of stuff. But they have had the benefit of the Wii U. The Wii U was a failure, so they have all these Wii U games they could just dust off, stick another few things in.
That's really interesting. I was thinking about that. I was, and this is a bit contentious, but I was thinking how much more challenging it's going to be next gen in terms of hitting that first party slate that they've done such a great job of, as to your point, like, you know, kind of having a game every month for X years, that they don't have that Wii U, you know, kind of suite of games to just chuck over, because that's not a trivial issue, right? Like you got to conceptualize and come up with a whole new Mario Kart and a whole new Smash, etc., rather than kind of doing these 1.5 games, which, you know, a lot of their tentpole first party releases were.
Some of them were, yeah, but I think you're right, they've hit, but that's the reason why they've just invested so much in their studio expansion, right? They've opened an entire new building, and they're trying to, and you know, they're starting to. It was only this generation's the first generation where they had their handheld teams and their console teams sort of merged together and putting out. So they're still working through a bit of that, but it is the challenge, I think, for Nintendo, is to have a regular cadence of games that keeps people engaged. But interestingly, after that first year of the Switch, which was like blockbuster, it was only ever 1 or 2 big games a year that came out from Nintendo. They did sort of, and I think they probably expanded enough to manage that. But yeah, it is the challenge. You know, they had we've got a gap in the schedule, let's throw out a Bayonetta. We've got a gap in the schedule, let's throw out a Pikmin 3, a Captain Toad, a Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze. They had all of those just sitting in their back pockets. They stick out, sells a couple of million units, And they won't have that necessarily. I mean, there's a couple of Wii U games left. I'm sure they'll start.
Star Fox Guard.
Yeah, Wind Waker HD. They might, and and maybe they'll start moving into Wii games and start doing a few of those, because doesn't have to just be Wii U titles. There are certain games, GameCube games, for instance. There's so many of those that just didn't find much of an audience.
And they're going to have a strong lineup if they're coming out, sort of Q4 period, right?
I think so. If they come out September time, maybe they could release something in September, something in October, something in November. That they can follow the sort of thing they did with the Switch. But if they're launching November, Christmas, you're going to want more than one game to shift. And I suspect they're going to expect a very strong. They're going to have to put a lot of units into the market. They only had like 3 million Switches in the first month of the Switch. They were very conservative. And if they're going to launch in November, I triple that. And then they'll want to have a game and a couple of games in order to reach as many.
I mean, they mentioned it on the again this referencing this Nate the Hate podcast. It seems to be a very well connected Nintendo kind of leaker. He mentioned a 3D Mario this week, and that's now the third or fourth person I've heard that from. I mean, it's not rocket science, is it? I mean, Odyssey came out 18. Was it 18?
17. It was that
17. Right, so there hasn't been a 3D Mario for 6-7 years.
They did that by the point this comes out, didn't they? But,
so it's really not surprising, but I keep hearing that in the background. And I was thinking, when was the last time they launched a console with a Mario game? Are we going back 30 years? The GameCube launch didn't.
Luigi's Mansion.
Wii didn't. Wii U came out, New Super Mario Brothers U?
Yeah, technically, I guess that one.
Technically, but no.
Yeah.
Switch
don't
didn't.
knock 2D Mario games, Andy. They're huge.
3DS launched with no first-party games at all, apart from, I think, maybe Pilot Wings.
And Nintendo
DS was... What did DS come out with?
Was it Metroid Prime Hunt? No.
That's it, yeah. Metroid Prime Hunters, yeah. Mario 64 3D come out?
Yeah, they did that. Mario 64.
It wasn't been 3D on that DS, sorry, DS.
The GBA had a
super long time since they've launched a console with a Mario game.
Yeah, Mario's big. It would be. You think about how big Mario is right now, right? Is it 100? You look at those numbers. It's a big. It will be a big title to launch with. The brand has never been stronger. They
need to be bold, mate, and just launch it with a new Steel Diver.
That's it. That's what they need. I'm sure Miyamoto will somehow force the company to make another Pikmin. And
Steel Divers, he's as well, mate. So
yeah.
Steel Diver, let's not forget, got a sequel.
Of course it did.
Well, before we move on, I have a question for each of you. What is the minimum memory you think this thing can come with, and what price are we looking at, Chris?
Minimum memory?
Yeah. Considering the size of games nowadays, and if they're going to try and presumably the fidelity will be higher, the Switch is 32 gigs.
Nate the Hate this week, again giving them more love, mentioned 512, and I'm gonna back that as well. That's the suggestion that I was hearing. I mean, you've got to think about it. If they're moving to... Again, I don't have a clue how powerful this thing's going to be, but let's assume it's like PS4 Pro power. How many PS4 games are sub 50 gig? I mean, a lot of them are over 100 gig, right? Switch has come with 32 gigs on board. Yeah, okay, you can expand the thing, but this thing can't come with anywhere near that
proprietary
kind of
memory cards like the PS Vita. This is how we do it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he mentioned as well that because I say in my report that it's going to have cartridges, and he mentioned that I think MVG on there mentioned that it's almost definitely a different cartridge format, which again is what I was told. So it'd be interesting whether in backwards compatibility terms whether that all.
If it hadn't come with cartridges, that would have been I did some analysis recently. I took the four biggest, because Nintendo don't share their first party game digital data with the charts companies, but other companies do. So I looked at Lego Star Wars, I looked at Mario & Rabbids, I looked at FIFA, I looked at Just Dance. I took those 4 games, and the average percentage of people who bought that game physically was 80%. So that's in Europe. So 80% of those game sales were in Europe. This is a console that's like, you compare that to Xbox where the numbers are reversed. You've got to reverse those numbers to get down to Xbox. So Nintendo is still, and this is when we talk about the innovation of the Switch 2, what are they going to do that's different? What's they going to do that's going to make people go, oh, we should get this one. I think Nintendo would be I think it'll be a good move for them to focus on the digital innovation, because that's the one. I love the Switch. I think it's the best console I've ever made. But I think the one thing about it that I miss is where's the Street Pass? Where's the Miiverse? Where was that digital?
They kind of panicked a little bit too much in the other direction, didn't they? After the last machines, because that is sadly missing the personality. The Switch machine itself has zero personality, none. Like, I could sit here quite happily listening to menu music from the 3DS, you know. Like the Wii U made me happy to use it when it wasn't loading, but it was a joy to use that thing. Like, they had a video call software on there, and it was just, you know, so Nintendo. So like you'd like a curtain would kind of reveal the person you're calling, like, oh, this, and then when they'd fade in, like blur, like fade into view, like da 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 da, like just build this anticipation, and then it did it the opposite when you ended the call, and it almost like without hesitation it'd encourage you to wave and then slowly fade out, you know, just stuff like that. Whereas the Switch is like, well, shit, better not do any of that stuff.
Yeah,
you know, nobody likes this. I mean, where's the shop music? I'll tell you where the shop music is. The Switch can barely run its shop in the first place. Imagine you put a song on there. Oh my God.
It's a terrible digital store, right? There's so much about it that is like digitally, this is the most it's backwards. And I think if Nintendo, rather than sit there and go, right, what the novelty controller can we do? What screen can we do that's funky? I think for them, and I'm not expecting to do that, I think for them it's just invest in the digital bit. And sort of get that digital sales being up will benefit indies. It'll benefit Nintendo. Shops will cry a little bit about it, but the focus in on that area, but also give us something that keeps us sort of sticky with the platform. Interestingly, I think the best personalities in the Nintendo account. Whenever I go on my Nintendo and I've got me playing some game, and it's sort of there's my me from the Wii era prancing about on the screen. It's not really in the Switch unit console itself. It's on the Nintendo account, and I think syncing that up is where. But
yeah, I mean, the fact that Street Pass is, I mean, I imagine Street Pass wouldn't be hugely practical on a Switch. It's not quite as you can't like put it in your pocket, and you know, I guess there's like battery issues as well. But that's sorely missed. So I agree with you there. I think coming back to your question, Jordan, I think it's going to be more expensive than the Switch, definitely.
Yeah.
That's why all the talk is about LCD screens, because you know
that's so depressing. See, going back to
it is,
Switch
but again,
after
you know,
the OLED,
Steam Deck's got an LCD screen as well, right?
It does, and it looks terrible.
Yeah, that's just going to be how it is. Unfortunately,
I don't know why
Nintendo don't give a shit.
I don't know why they just do two. You know, they have a
probably because I imagine they're absolutely pooing the bed about stock after the last couple of years.
Yeah, but it's okay now. It's over. Component shortages are over. But yeah,
it also gives them a built-in revision in a couple of years for
and
the Switch to OLED.
Yeah. And it allows them to be focused on what they're selling. It simplifies the message around what the product is and stuff. Yeah, I know.
It's just depressing because the Switch OLED is a lovely little handheld. Story number 2. Final Fantasy is finally coming to Xbox. Well, Final Fantasy XIV is. Phil Spencer made a surprise appearance at Final Fantasy XIV Fan Fest in Las Vegas to announce that the game was coming to current gen systems after years and years of him saying that he was trying to bring it to the Xbox platform. It will launch in spring 2024. Andy, is this the beginning of the floodgates opening, or will Final Fantasy VII Remake and 16 remain in Sony's jail?
Well, that's the magic question, isn't it? And I don't really have an answer for you, other than I think it's quite clear that Phil Spencer is sort of like irked by the fact that Square Enix keeps keeping games off of Xbox, and despite popular belief, not always for like a PlayStation marketing deal either. There's lots of cases where they've just not bothered. I mean, it's not unusual for them. I mean, they do lots of like exclusive Switch games as well. You not so many exclusive Xbox games, but it's a bit of a black mark, isn't it? In term, you want all of these big third party releases to be on your platform. Many of them that are not on there, it's a bit of a black mark. So this is obviously Final Fantasy 14. The MMO is a massive game. Phil Spencer's a guy who famously plays a lot of games. He's been talking about this for years. I'm sure they first talked about it before the pandemic, like in 2019 when they had the EXO event in London. And it's, still not, I think it's coming now, they announced 2024. So you're talking 5 years this has taken to get this game over. PlayStation seem pretty keen to keep Final Fantasy, the main ones, wrapped up on PlayStation. We've still not seen Final Fantasy VII Remake, any word of that coming over, even though that allegedly their marketing deal's done. I'm sure Chris has got more to add to this than me, to be honest.
I didn't. Final Fantasy 14 coming to Xbox is meh, right? It's not much to that. Final Fantasy, there has been Final Fantasy games on Xbox in the past. It's not that big a deal in and of itself. We've been waiting for this for a while. What I thought was interesting was Phil Spencer coming to the Final Fantasy event and being on stage. For me, it was more that was the statement in my mind, because clearly Phil is very eager to woo Square Enix. So Japan is very important. Asian market is massive. It's a massive video games market, and Xbox has almost no presence. It's their big. When you ever talk to them about acquisitions, pre-Activision Blizzard anyway, they used to say, Japan, we want a Japanese studio. We want something in that market that can give us a presence there. And this has been a thing for them since the 360 days, and they still don't. They're still barely, I think, what do they say, 3% market share? Like it's non-existent.
It's not, you walk around the game stores out there. I mean, obviously they don't do physical games, so it's a bit unfair. But the fact that they don't, and it's literally they'll have like the size of shelf that you'd expect to have for like a certain brand of Wii case. Not even Wii cases, like Switch cases. Switch cases will be like 3 aisles. But if you want like Doraemon dressed as a postman, Switch cases, that's about the size of the Xbox section in an average Japanese department store. I mean, the advertising's all over the place. They've got Game Pass all over there. I mean, I can't say I've been digging massively deep into it, but anecdotally, people I speak to out there in the games industry say that they could still push it more in Japan. That a lot of what they're saying is kind of like just, word service to an extent. They've done a better job there. They launched in parallel. Game Pass, they're hoping is the differentiator because PC gaming is growing big in Japan, where it wasn't traditionally. It was traditionally kind of a mobile and console place. But they've got a stigma to get over, really. In terms of that's now ingrained in the culture, right? That's the console we don't get. That's the American one that's not for us, and that's true for developers as well. I mean, they've been talking about getting a Japanese developer for how long?
Yeah,
that's probably the same as well, right? Years and years and years and years. And the Platinum Games, who I go and visit often. Obviously, they were publishing a game with them, and that didn't work out for whatever reason. And, whenever I go to Platinum, I point out to them, politely, when are you going to release a game on Xbox? Like, you've not released... So after... Someone might be able to dig a hole in this, but I'm pretty sure after Scalebound was cancelled, they released Automata. Or how do you pronounce it? I always pronounce that wrong. Automata. Near Automata, which is a Square Enix game. That came out like a couple of months later. So it pre-existing deal with another publisher. Since then, they've not released any of their major multi-platform games on Xbox. So that's going back years now. That's got to be. I mean, when did Automata come out? That's got to be
2017.
Yeah. So 6 years. There is a stigma that they need to get over, right? In that market. Like, if it's not... It's like, I mean, they could tell... in the UK, for example, imagine they could tell us, like, how big the Huawei, Chinese, platform is in China. Do you not realise it has more users than anything you'll do? But if it's not on front, in Tesco's, if it's out of sight, out of mind, you're not really feeling that motivation, right? To make something that large portion of people somewhere else are going to enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously they've done the deal with Kojima, haven't they? They've got they do have a studio now through Tango, so but it's not enough. And Final Fantasy isn't going to change that. I think from a Square Enix perspective, Xbox might be an opportunity for them in the West, right? It's their, Xbox is strong in the US, it's strong in the UK. They've got a good market there. Final Fantasy 16 numbers in the UK weren't especially strong. They're probably looking, if we were on that platform, it might be do a little bit better. So that might happen, particularly now Activision Blizzard might grow Game Pass subscriber numbers, and they might view Game Pass as a great opportunity, particularly for their live service games like Final Fantasy 14 that would do very well Take-Two have mastered it, really. They keep putting GTA 5 every now and again in Game Pass with GTA Online just to boost their numbers, get a load of engagement, and then they come out of it. And it's like there's a lot of things you can do with that with subscription, and Xbox is sort of leading the way there. And then there's cloud. And
they seem to be figuring it out a little bit with the subs, aren't they? Like, because I seem to think that Elder Scrolls Online is not on Game Pass, and some of their other stuff they're kind of their subscription MMOs.
I think there's a base level you can get of Elder Scrolls Online, like a taster that's always on Game Pass. I don't think
they've yet kind of like rolled in
like
that as an added value.
It's surprising to me that games like Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail, these like massive free-to-play games, just aren't on Xbox, and whenever they're asked about it, it's just like, no, not for now. That feels like the next step in getting stuff like that, because they're not they're de facto exclusive to PlayStation. Like, there's no deal or anything like that, but I suppose it's just a case of, is that audience there? And this is Final Fantasy 14's an interesting start, but the as you mentioned, Andy, stuff like skipping the pixel remasters for Final Fantasy on Xbox, there's a lot of
it's just really weird.
Yeah, it's because that doesn't seem like it'd be the most expensive thing in the world to bring across the Xbox.
But it's not just about money; it's about effort, right? So you've got these teams.
That's worse. No, we just can't be asked.
No, but it's true, right? These teams have got a lot of time. They've not got like the decision recently.
But to be fair, that is the excuse they always give. Oh, but we've just only got so many resources.
Yeah, well,
ever.
Yeah, no, but if you're going to have
it's now been 20 years since you released the game. Well, we've only got so many resources.
And it's about where you put the effort, right? So if you sit there and go, they could move their resources to make an Xbox game, but if it doesn't deliver them any significant revenue, they're going to put those resources on something else that will. And that's just the harsh reality. That's why so many of those Switch games that were Marvel's Midnight Suns and everything, for example, they could have carried on and released that on the Switch. But the reality is the game didn't sell anything on the other consoles, let alone what it was going to do on Nintendo. So they went, you know what, we're going to take this team off that and put them on something else, and which will deliver us the numbers. And Xbox Series S and X has gone backwards. Microsoft, despite creating really good machines, I think, and despite the studios they've bought, and there are some good games in there, Microsoft is going backwards compared to how it was on the Xbox One. PC stuff's growing for them, but their audience, their people who are buying their console, which isn't their main priority anymore, but people who are buying their console is dropping off. And if you're a Square Enix going, right, where are we going to invest our money? You put it in the new thing, or the thing that's growing. And so I can see why Xbox has to work hard. They have to make it easy for them. I did wonder if Final Fantasy 14. My first thought that came into my head, I wonder if Xbox is porting that for them. Was my first, are they doing the work? Are they doing the legwork to try and get these games onto their system? And that's something they might have to do. They did it with PUBG, didn't they? Back in when they had that, the way they got that on there was doing it for them.
Guys making PUBG at the time were a bit smaller than Square Enix, though.
Yes, it's true. It's true.
We will have more about games that could potentially come to Game Pass after this. Did you know that you can get involved in the show by sending an email to podcast@videogameschronicle.com? We'll read the best of them on the podcast. You can catch the audio version of the show every week on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Now back to the show. And we are back. Hasbro has apologised for claiming that Activision has lost its Transformers games. This came from, I believe, a Comic-Con discussion where the Hasbro team were asked to get these Transformers games that have been taken away from digital storefronts to be brought back, and they said, quote, Sadly, apparently Activision's not sure what hard drives they're on in their building, which is just hilarious to me, as if these games are just on like bundles of hard drives, like in a box. I know it's slightly more complex than that, but that's all I can picture. It's just under someone's desk. When a company eats a company that eats a company, things get lost. Hope is now that with the deal moving forward with Microsoft and Xbox, they'll go through all the archives, every hard drive, because it's an easy Game Pass ad. Then a few days later, I got an email which said, to clarify, the comments to suggest that Transformers games have been lost were made in error. We apologise to Activision and regret any confusion. Do you think they got an awkward phone call from Activision, Andy, or is this just keeping the peace?
Well, the thing that I am most interested in this story is how Activision has dealt with it. I mean, obviously Hasbro have come out, which again, quite surprising that they've made this sweeping statement, which has been denied. It doesn't mean it's not necessarily true, but I'm surprised that they said it in the first place. And then Chris here made a very good point when their enforcer, Miss kind of is it Mercivy? You pronounce her surname?
I don't say her name in public.
You don't say her name. Oh, just in case, yeah. Chris made a very good point on Twitter where she kind of like she did the usual thing on the aggression, which was kind of quote, I think it was PC Gamer, and say, well, your headlines are wrong. We have the code, and it's like, but when press reached out to your PR team, you told us there was no comment. So, and then now you're upset that the headlines are wrong. And again, just to explain to the children on social media that just because they deny it does not mean that is the truth. I mean, I love there was someone on here who just basically just told you to piss off, Chris.
Yeah, I ended up after a while just muting that conversation. But the problem.
So you don't have the right to know everything.
Well,
piss off.
My favourite. I got quite a few comments. It's all because you didn't get a response. You still printed the story, and I was like,
but again,
I did get a response, and the response was no comment. The thing is, Hasbro is a major company that went. Activision's lost our games. Well, that's quite an accusation.
It's a huge claim, yeah.
So I went to Activision and went, is this true? Expecting them to say no, it's bollocks. And then I wouldn't have run the story. It's not. I'm like, well,
that's how journalism works, right?
Yeah.
Hey, look, this is not true. Okay, we won't bother giving it any air then.
And then, but they said no comments. So I was like, okay, well, and to be fair, the story we ran was Transformers game, Activision's misplaced Transformers games. It says Hasbro, which is true. Which everything about that sentence is right. That's what Hasbro said. But my point was like, well, I wasted my time on that story if it's bollocks. Why didn't you tell me it was bollocks?
I mean, that's the most frustrating thing about this Trumpian, kind of rhetoric that's seeping into some corners of game corporation worship, right? Which is this thing where it's like, well, if they said it, then it must be true. When, of course, it's like, how do you not see that a major company making this claim is a legitimate story that is worth, your attention, has a lot of value to our readers? Like, how can you expect someone to ignore that? Because, again, you'd get shit the other direction, wouldn't you, if it turned out to be true? Well, how comes you didn't report on that?
When I covered the PlayStation 40 million story, there was a couple of fanboys in my Twitter DMs, Twitter messages, just saying to me that you taking
get
PlayStation
in your Twitter DMs for posting pictures of your garden.
I sent questioning whether I had questioned Sony strongly enough about that 40 million figure and about how clearly is. One person said it's clearly a lie, and in that situation, it's actually illegal for them to lie about their sales performance because they're a public company. But it was just like one moment I'm being told. It's just this sort of I just have to ignore it a little bit, but it is. But I was a bit. And if the response had been that we all know our dearly departed friend who used to work at Activision would just call us up and say, look, I'm pretty sure this is bollocks. There's nothing to this story, but I'll get a statement for you, right? And we would have known. Okay, we've got a wink here.
I mean, that's. I mean, again, a lot of people work in PR have got their hands tied, right?
Yeah.
They'd love to be in a position to be able to do that, but that's proper old school PR. Look, I've seen it, but I think it's bollocks. Okay, won't report on it.
Yeah. I stay out of these things now. I've had my wars with that side of the internet. I'm their number one fan. Just wait till I give Starfield 2 stars and they have to wipe my address from the internet.
You know, if it actually is 2 stars now, you're fucked.
Wouldn't know.
That's another one. While we're on one, so Starfield is out in what? How many weeks?
It's out in a month. It's a month this week.
It's out in a month.
Yeah.
Has anyone played it?
IGN.
So IGN played it with Todd Howard sat on their lap, probably. No offense, IGN, but it was a world exclusive. So I imagine it was under very controlled conditions. So is seriously no one going to play this game before it comes out?
Well,
is it a game?
I mean, I'm sure it's no. I'm I don't want to, drum up hyperbole. Like, obviously, it's almost certainly going to be a fantastic game, but. So I'm not really suggesting that there's any alarm bells go off. I just think it's a little bit disappointing that no one's played it.
We will probably have it. Like when Gamescom is happening, we will probably have the game, and it's not going to be.
That's what I mean. You have to assume at this point, right? And this is us speaking from experience of 20 years' experience of how this works. If the game's out in a month, they're not doing previews now. Because if it's the size of the game, you'd have to hope that we're reviewing it soon.
It all comes down to what's worth their time, right? Because I work on the event side of the games business.
And Bethesda kind of like to think outside the box in those terms as well, right?
Well, I'm at the moment working on things with PAX and EGX at the minute, and there is a game that's coming out very, very close to the EGX show, and they don't have code for the game. They could just give us the game and put it on and we can play it. But they don't want fans to see certain things yet. They don't want certain things spoiled. They want to fast forward that bit of dialogue. They don't want to... They certain bits they want to do, which is what they do when they do a controlled demo, even a preview, right? They choose a slice of the game which gives a bit of insight, but not too much. They like to control that, what they're sharing before the game is released. But that requires a team and time and someone to go through it and to trim that bit off and that kind of thing. And they've not had to do that for a few years because there hasn't been the ability to have hands-on.
And the pandemic's been very damaging on that front, I think. I mean, you're correct. They don't have to do that anymore. Like, Starfield is probably the greatest example of a game they don't have to give to press. You know what the last great example of that was? Cyberpunk. That was a game they didn't have to give to press. And it was quite eventful after it came out. And again, I'm not suggesting that anything like near the debacle that we saw of that release is going to happen. But I guarantee there'll be certain things that are perhaps negatively surprising to consumers that would have emerged from some sort of press access. Because again, at the end of the day, if press are not playing games, that's because it's beneficial to the people selling them games, not to us.
Yeah, I guess Game Pass gives people a chance to jump in as well. I mean, I don't know, I'm optimistic. I think Starfield and Spider-Man 2 in many ways is almost at the start of the generation. Because I feel like we've had 3 years of cross-gen games.
That's absolute returnal erasure that I will not have on this podcast.
No, but Ratchet and Clank, I'm a fan of that as well. Like, there have been some, but I mean, in terms of like big major titles that are built for the platforms they're on, I kind of look at Starfield and Spider-Man 2 as like the sort of like a big moment in that, and I'm optimistic. I think they're both going to be amazing.
Well, hopefully
don't hate me, Xbox fans.
Hopefully we'll be playing Starfield soon, because if this is a case where we get the game the day before it comes out, it might actually kill me. Next story: Layoffs reported that Callisto Protocol studio Striking Distance. In a statement to IGN, a spokesperson for publisher Krafton said Striking Distance Studio and Krafton have implemented strategic changes that realign the studio's priorities to a better position as current and future projects for success. Unfortunately, these changes have impacted 32 employees. Callisto Protocol was an interesting one. It seemed to get a lot of hype beforehand. It was on Keighley stages. There was a lot of, like, Glenn was out and about hooting and tooting that game. I feel like it was at every major show, and then it seemed to go quite quietly. Chris, what did you think of Callisto Protocol? I believe did you review that for VGC?
I did for you guys. It's all right. It isn't as good as Dead Space. It isn't as good. Out of all the horror games I've had, it's not the best one. But the thing for that one is craft. I think if you look at the actual number, I think the reported numbers were like 2 million in the first month or something. That's quite good. That's better than Dead Space did. But it's the amount of money they spent on it. You talked about being on Keely's stage, talked about Glenn Schofield being around.
Yeah, but most of their appearances are Jeff's things, right? So that's probably wiped out their profit straight away.
But you do a marketing campaign in December, it's very different to doing a marketing campaign in January. The cost
especially
of that
when you're releasing like weeks before a high-profile remake of the thing that you're selling based on.
Yeah, that didn't help them. And
that seems really odd to me.
They pitched it, and you know what? I think if they'd managed that marketing budget, they'd have had quite a successful launch. They were very heavy on it. It's a horror game as well. Like, I don't get me wrong, horror games can do very well. We've seen Resident Evil numbers, but there is more of a niche genre. It isn't a game that you have to release in December. I looked at that and I felt that they've spent too much on it. I didn't think it was a game that was bad. I think the studio's first title. It was interesting. It had its moments, it could have built from there. I'm sure they still can. It felt like a game that they spent a lot of money on marketing and promoting and pushing to try and make it something bigger than it was ever going to be. The game.
I bet it's frustrating for them as well. It kind of reminds me of the situation we were in when we were working on Ukulele at Platonic, where it's like, these guys, don't want to service these fans. These Dead Space fans have been crying out for this for years. So we're going to leave and we're going to make a studio and we're going to do it. So we're going to announce it and blah. And then like 6 months in, it's like, oh, well, yeah, we're going to do old stuff again. We're going to do Rare Replay. And it's like it puts them almost like, they've been put up against EA
themselves.
When it was like, well, we've only done this because we thought you weren't servicing this audience.
Oh, to be clear though, I haven't checked the numbers recently, and it's actually really hard because Krafton, again, another company, doesn't share digital data, but I believe the Callisto Protocol comfortably did better than Dead Space Remake. It's certainly in Europe.
Dead Space Remake's fucking great as well.
It's great, but I think EA, I think the difference, I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect EA is happier than Krafton because EA put that game out quietly, made on a budget.
I mean, again, the objective of that game is probably just to hire people to work on Iron Man, right?
Give them something to do between two games.
He's giving them something to do. They're learning the technology on a similar genre of game, and then they've hired up during that, and then they move straight on. Although that said, when I interviewed the creative director, the French-Canadian guy who came from Ubisoft, I can't remember his name, he was sort of suggesting that wasn't necessarily the case. Yeah. He was like, oh well, just so you know, we could work on multiple projects.
Yeah. Which should be a Dead
will make him look a bit silly if he's now like, hi, I'm on Iron Man.
but I think, with Dead Space, it was made quite, it was made relatively quickly. It was made on the budget. It was built on the story that came before. They were able to make a game. A game doesn't have to. The difference in Callisto Protocol and Dead Space is Dead Space didn't have to do very much to be successful, and Callisto Protocol did. And the fact that came out so close to each other meant that fans had to choose, right? Or they may not have had to, but there's only so much of that horror.
Which is a fair point, by the way. It's £70, $70.
It came out the same day, Callisto Protocol, as Marvel's Midnight Suns and Need for Speed.
Again, that's what I was going to say. That was going to be my next thing. It came out in that window of lesser sized AAA releases that all bombed on their ass during that period. I
met a fellow Midnight Suns fan in real life the other day because I
found one.
I have a Midnight Suns hoodie that they gave to us when we went to Firaxis that they can't sell because it's a Gorillaz parody. And when I spoke to Jake Solomon about 5 seconds before he left, he was like, yeah, we wanted to sell them, but Marvel was like, we'd get sued into oblivion, so let's not. So anyway, I was wearing this hoodie into the small Morrison's that's around the corner from mine, and the guy was like, you play that Marvel's Midnight Suns? I was like, yeah.
Oh, you found one. You found one of the 10
in the wild.
I have not played Marvel's Midnight Suns, and I'm a massive fan of Firaxis and XCOM. I was waiting for the Switch version.
But I don't get I don't get their noise around that as well, because I'm a massive Firaxis fan and I've not played it. And what put me off is that seemingly immediately after that game came out, all the PR around it was about how awful it had done.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we're putting free weekends and we're cutting the price, and we've sacked everyone now, and we're really, in their
we're making the
results,
next Sev, guys. We're making the next
Sev.
Sev.
It's like, well, you're really hyping me up for this. Like,
Yeah.
you should be. It got the critical reception for that game was excellent.
It
felt like they should just be shouting about it for ages.
As a games industry guy, 2K games have had a lot of misses lately. Like Lego 2K Drive, it's done nothing. WWE was down quite a bit this year. Obviously, the NBA games doing these big numbers. Marvel's Midnight Suns, Tiny Tina. They've had a lot of games lately that, I mean, they're all quite small. I
guess the good thing about 2K is that they can afford to do that, right?
Yeah, they've got Rockstar in there.
Oh yeah, and that's the difference between them and Ubisoft, is that they can try some new stuff, and it can be critically acclaimed and just not do so well. All right, and they,
Marvel's Midnight Suns is an example of how not to publish a game. You released it at the wrong time, at the wrong price. You didn't explain
with the wrong name.
Just everything about that game should
just
wrong.
Be called Marvel XCOM.
And I will say this: Strauss Zelnick, who came out and said, the developer did their bit. And was his like very much making it clear that the reason why this game didn't do very well shouldn't be put at their door, shouldn't be put at Firaxis's door, and it's a shame. I actually would like to go play it. I actually did a story at the time about this really sad story about a boy who was dying the year, and the developers of that game flew to created a demo code for that game that didn't exist and got it to him his basically his deathbed, where he got to play it, and even his name's in the credits. They put a little thing in the game, and it's a really lovely story about it. And I wrote that, and I thought, I can't wait to play this game. I think I really want to, and I just haven't. And for the same reason, like the story now is that this game is done, and everyone's moved on.
It's going to be a game in coming years where people are like, oh, remember that was brilliant. I wonder why did no one play this game. There's going to be thought pieces about it in 5 years' time about the forgotten. It's going to be
gem. the next Blur or Split Second.
Oh, just wait until the license expires and you can't buy it anymore. It's a shame. Marvel's Midnight Suns fans unite. There are literally dozens of us. Next story. Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion is getting a remake. This is according to a Reddit user who's reportedly a former employee of Virtuous. According to this employee, which again, this is verified by people on Reddit, so take that as you will. The studio is apparently working on Project Alter, which they say is either a remake or remaster of Oblivion, which will be on Unreal Engine 5. Now, whether or not this is true, this brings an interesting question to mind. Does Microsoft, specifically with Fallout and Elder Scrolls, just start saying, we've got to get these games out, we can't wait for BGS to make the next Fallout after Elder Scrolls? Chris, how are they going to handle the big, like the big BGS titles now that it's taking 10 years to make one of them?
Well, it's a huge opportunity for them, and I think that this is Andy, we talked about this, I don't know if it was over the phone or on a podcast, about how Xbox, they do remasters and remakes, but not as often as they could do. There is this huge back catalogue of Bethesda games in particular. They could very easily, you look at the stuff that id Software's done with the Quake remasters, and they've done with Night Dive and things like that, and how that's found strong audience and strong engagement. You want to put some cool Elder Scrolls stuff in Game Pass that you bought a games company that you can go, hey, you want the next Elder Scrolls? You're gonna have to buy an Xbox. Which Xbox? The next one? The one after that? Because at the moment they're all on PlayStation. So yeah, remasters, remakes. Oblivion's a great one, right? It's actually, when I was thinking about what's left to remake, of course, I
think it actually makes a lot of sense, because the next Elder Scrolls is not coming out for a very long time, right? Yeah. I mean, they've said it's in pre-production or something. I mean, Skyrim came out more than 10 years ago.
More than that now, yeah. So you assume if they remake this, they put it out in like 24, 25, then Elder Scrolls 6 is like a 27
think about that
game or something
like that is, I mean, I know that's obviously a long time, but even 5 years is a long time these days. There's going to be, by the time that game comes out, if they're not pumping out remasters and stuff, there's going to be a generation of adult players who are like, what's this?
I genuinely wouldn't be surprised if Bethesda Bethesda Game Studios don't release another original game this generation. I think Naughty Dog only did 2 last generation. Rockstar only did one.
Well, it's interesting that they said there's going to be nothing at QuakeCon this year, which I think is unusual. Like they said, there's no like Bethesda stuff here this year. Just come and play Quake.
Yeah. Which I
think Bethesda's a publisher will release more. To be clear, like Indiana Jones and things, but I just meant Todd Howard's team. Yeah. So
who did they give Fallout? Because that's like they're doing a TV show. They can't just have Fallout sitting there doing nothing for the next 15 years. Did they say to Obsidian?
Didn't Jeff Grubb report that they're doing New Vegas 2?
That seems very much like it's a name on a whiteboard. Like it didn't. I mean, they're doing the Outer Worlds 2 at the minute.
How big is Obsidian? Right? Like I mean, yeah, they all of these like RPG devs who all have got deep links to each other are now all under the Xbox family. Just give them it's an absolute no-brainer. There's no way Bethesda should be working on Fallout now. Like give it to Obsidian, give it to Inixile. Yeah, let those guys do it.
And it's the easiest like big conference announcement ever for them to just like get a bit of credit. It's like, remember this Fallout game that everyone says is better than the ones that BGS made? Well, we have Obsidian and we're going to do it again. So hopefully that is the case. This is a weird story. Star Wars Jedi Survivor, famous game that can barely run on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series, is coming to PS4 and Xbox One. Andy, what's going on? What's happening?
Well, I mean, that's more of a question for Captain Business, I think.
Captain Business, we call upon you. Why are they doing this? They can't make the game run on the good consoles.
Well, in terms of that part, I understand why they're doing it because
it's sold really well, right? They said it's outpacing the first one with like a smaller user base.
They've got a big audience. EA knows that there's an audience that's still playing on PlayStation 4. Here's a fun little statistic I've not revealed yet on GI. PS4 sales in the UK are up 330% this year. Right?
Really?
So people are still buying.
What, year on year?
Yeah, on last year.
I've not seen a PS4 in a shop in about 5 years. Like they're not in Smash.
Why has that happened?
I suspect, if I'm the pure guess, I've not looked into this. I'm guessing that last year there were no PS4s put on the shelves because PlayStation were prioritising PS5s, and now this year they've actually released some on shelves, and as a result, the numbers are high. Like I don't think it's any indication of PS4 being more popular than it was last year. But
it's too late, mate. Written the headline.
But it's a fun little. I just thought, that's interesting. Like the people are still buying the machine. There is still an audience out there. We're on PlayStation, Xbox said they've done 40 million. I think Xbox think they've done 21, 22. So we're on less than 65 million install base now on this generation. There's around 200 million on the previous generation. So we've still got the vast majority of the console audience is still a PS4 and Xbox One audience. And hey, maybe they're planning a Switch 2 release if what you're hearing is true and it's going to be PS4 level. But in terms of technically how they're going to do it, I don't know. But it's interesting that I do actually find it a bit interesting that they are continuing to make games for PS4. Maybe that's why this generation has felt. And maybe I'm just old, but this generation doesn't feel like it's got started. It's because we haven't properly moved on from the last one. But
I cannot wait to see how that game handles all the big open areas. Like, so there's an interesting thing where obviously the release of Hogwarts Legacy was kind of staggered across the different consoles, and in either the I think it might have been the last generation version, they had to alter Hogwarts itself to put big canopies over certain open areas so it wouldn't have to load the distances that you could see in the PS5 and Xbox Series version. But Jedi Survivor's full of that, and while I had a pretty stable experience with it, it is one of the most unstable big budget games that is released recently. So I guess they're like, it doesn't really matter because no one's going to be looking up reviews of the PS4 and Xbox version. People are just going to see it on shelves and go, oh, there's that new Star Wars game.
But again, coming back, the increasing removal of the press from the cycle.
Yeah,
this is the shit that happens, right? Because it's like, well, the game's broken, sold loads, we don't care.
Fuck it,
they've got The Witcher 3 working on the Switch, fine. They've got Doom working on the Switch, fine. There are developers out there very good at optimizing.
I'm sure it'll run fine. I'm sure it'll run. I mean, it will look like shit. They're going to compromise the hell out of it. Like, I'm thinking one particular sequence on Jeddah where you're diving all over the place for about 3 minutes.
Like the best part of the game.
They're just going to have to replace it with a storyboard. But
they're going to get
there'll be a video. It'll certainly be a video game.
Yeah, they'll get Cameron Monaghan to come onto the bottom of the screen and just explain what happens in this scene, cut for time. Just finally, while Comcast is losing billions of dollars on Peacock, the Mario stuff that they're doing seems to be doing incredibly well. The film grossed 1.3 billion worldwide, and Comcast is crediting the success of Super Nintendo World for record quarters in both Universal Studios Japan and Hollywood. The third park is planned for Florida. Do you think that Universal just doubles down on this? Obviously, we've got the Donkey Kong Land coming. How long before they go, let's do a Pokemon Land? I know there's already a Pokemon float at the Japanese one, like part of the parade or something like that.
There's lots of Pokemon stuff at the Japanese park.
How long until they just
Donkey
do
Kong's
it?
the next one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Donkey Kong's the next one.
So there's got to be a game.
I don't know much about theme parks, so I don't want to.
Andy, you've been to Super Nintendo World how many times? 104 times.
3 times in the last 6 months. If you include visiting it before it opens, 4 times, because we went to the shop after the Game Awards in Hollywood, and then I went to the Japanese one in April. Then after Game Awards, after Summer Game Fest, I went to the American one with you in June, and then I went to Nintendo World Japan again last month. So yes, I'm quite done with it, to be honest.
I mean,
back for Donkey Kong.
We've said this a million times. The Hollywood one is crap. Like the Hollywood one is just
the Hollywood one's not very good.
It's like a car
I've never been
park.
to the other one. I thought it was good.
I don't know if it's just when I went, there was 100,000 people there. You could barely see any of the Nintendo
it's a
stuff.
45-minute queue to put your wristband on a Goomba.
Yeah,
there's too many people in there. Yeah. It's too small.
We gave up, didn't we? We did the Mario Kart ride. We went to the Toadstool Cafe. We sort of looked at stuff, and then we went somewhere else.
And you know what? It's just overall, it's not as good as. I mean, I really am quite envious of people who were able to go during the pandemic, like people who lived in Japan. Because obviously Japan didn't open until just shy of a year ago. Because if you go there, I mean, I've been there twice, obviously, recently, and it's just it feels like it's just been hoarded. Like all of the cool stuff that they had, I'm going to spend so much money here, it's just all gone.
Yeah. Like
someone made a point, I didn't even know this until it was pointed out to me. Because you remember when Nintendo announced Super Nintendo World, they announced it's the first, it was an original Nintendo-made toy, the Toko Toko Mario, where he walks. You push him. I've got one behind me somewhere. Someone sent me. He walks, basically. You push this little Mario toy, and he walks along. And it's the only thing at Universal that was made by Nintendo. It wasn't licensed out. It's a Nintendo toy. They discontinued it. So you can't get them now. So it's so unless you got someone sent you one during the pandemic, like I did, you can't get one. They stopped making it. Don't know why.
It's a weird situation. I think when I was at the Hollywood one, there was just kids in Mario shirts throughout all the sections of the park, in the Harry Potter bit.
But the one thing I noticed about the US one was that, if Nintendo sent their lawyers to that park just with a clipboard, they could clean up. The ratio to third-party Amazon seller Mario knockoff shirts to official ones must have been 10 to 1.
Not just Amazon, mate. There was people selling stuff outside the park.
That'll probably be it.
You know, when you go to gigs, when you're just outside the gig, it'll be two for a tenner. Here's your very authentic Paramore T-shirt. It was all that kind of stuff, which I don't know, a bit charming. But yeah, it's. I mean, maybe if Comcast have any money left after the Peacock disaster, they're losing. I think they said they're projected next year to lose 3.1 billion on Peacock, which is just wonderful streaming service. But have you watched that Mario movie again since? I find myself thinking, do I ever want to watch it again? Because I enjoyed it the first
Mario
time.
Movie?
But, yeah.
I've watched the Mario movie, and I'm not lying, over 50 times. I've got a 3-year-old who loves it.
Yeah, I was going to say,
he
my
walks
kids
around going peaches, 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 peaches almost daily. But here's the thing: I've actually grown from thinking, yeah, it's a bit shit, but I enjoyed it because I'm a Nintendo fan, to genuinely thinking it's actually pretty good. I've gone from on this journey on it where because there are little references and stuff, and I actually there's a bit in it honestly, it's the most delightful bit where at the end of the movie where Peach is, I'm not going to, who cares? Peach is says, "I'll never marry you," and it turns to a Cooper sitting in the front row going, "Drama." My son every now and again goes, "Drama," and I just think it's great.
The most illumination moment.
Yeah, but it is a very
my
illumination
God.
moment. But it's
whatever.
I got the soundtrack on vinyl now because I think the soundtrack's great and
You're part of the problem, Chris.
it's great.
This is why we can't have nice things.
I'm 10% of that 170 million, 100 whatever million people who've watched it.
I want them to make another Detective Pikachu movie because me and my partner watched that first one again recently, and it's really good. It had no right to be that good.
It's really good. I'm actually amazed they didn't make another one.
Yeah,
it did really well.
It got stuck. Well, they've recently come out to say
there's some chatter recently, isn't there, that it might be happening.
Because they greenlit it straight away, and then it got stuck in some form of product, and then
some form of pandemic.
Justice Smith, is it Justice Smith?
Justice Smith.
It came out right before the pandemic, didn't it?
Yeah, and he said that he doesn't think it's happening now, but then there was some chatter recently about it come back to life because it actually did very well, and it was and it's it's pretty decent. The scene where he's sort of drunk and he's singing the Pokemon theme song is still a highlight for me.
I mean, they did all that work making like quote unquote realistic looking Pokemon that all looked pretty good. They all kind of worked together in an aesthetic. Although it is funny watching it back, being like, okay, they clearly made like 30 Pokemon that are just in every scene. Everywhere you look, there's a Greninja like just sitting in the background.
It was a Deadline report earlier this year. It says that a director and a writer are in negotiations for the sequel.
Yeah. I also think the Mr. Mime joke is one of the darkest things I've seen in a video game movie. Is the I every now and again I sort of watch that scene. I think this is sinister.
It's tremendous, and it was like the right balance of. Although it is strange that Mewtwo canonically murders Rita Ora in that film. That's the only part that's just like a bit out there, and Bill Nye talking about the wonders of Pokemon working together. Another strange thing, the baddie in that film is like based on Milo Yiannopoulos, which puts it really in a strange place in cultural history. It's like, who is going to get these references to this weird right-wing grifter in 10 years' time? But Ryan Reynolds is too busy with his football exploits. You can send us your comments, questions and concerns to podcast@videogameschronicle.com. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Chris, what have you got coming up this week? Any interesting business things?
You put me on the spot. No. I'm writing a lot about the Italian games market. Andy and I went to First Playable, which is an Italian games event last month, and I spoke to pretty much every Italian game developer that has ever existed, and that's my life for the next week. And then I'm going to PAX at the end of the month to check out Nintendo Live in Seattle, which I'm quite excited about. That's what I'm doing.
Andy, we get anything good this week? Have we still got Bit Summit stuff to do? Is that still coming? Or
yeah, still got lots of Bit Summit stuff to do. And I'm also writing about the Italian games industry.
Well, I'm going to be spending the rest of my week being deeply annoyed at all the people going to the Pokemon World Championships in Yokohama. Although if you go to the Pokemon World Championships website right now, it just says access denied. So I don't know what I've done to annoy them.
Well, you feel better with the knowledge that they're all absolutely melting.
Yeah.
In 100% humidity heat.
Sweating.
My favourite Pokemon event story. Do you remember? Yeah, Andy, do you remember this many years ago?
Is this the shit fight?
Fans, yeah, the poo fight scandal. Yeah, it's the.
Go ahead. Regale us.
There was the story. I don't remember the exact details of the story, but I do remember the headline on MCV, which I worked on at the time, was "Pokemon fans in poo fight scandal," which was a group of Pokemon fans who were just messing around in a hotel and ended up flinging shit at each other in the hotel, and it ended up in the newspapers.
Pokemon fans, literally get your shit together.
Yeah,
it wasn't just fans. The winner of the UK Pokemon Championships was stripped of his title for failing to maintain the high standards of behaviour in a family-friendly event by throwing shit at his friends in the corridors of the hotel.
Yeah, Pokemon players and hotel poo fight scandal is the headline of the story. It was a Birmingham hotel, the Pokemon Video Game Championships. Yeah, what a...
I'm speechless.
That was 11 years ago. If that makes you feel, it makes you feel very old.
Halcyon days.
Those guys are telling their kids about it now.
Yeah, their kids are now competing at the World Championships.
I was there in the great shit brawl,
the great Birmingham shit fight. On that incredibly high note, I went to a Pokemon card tournament at the weekend. There was no shit throwing, but I did get absolutely destroyed, which was pretty unedifying. But
should have thrown a turd at him, mate.
It was good fun all the same. It's weird being in like the place is called Geek Retreat in Glasgow, and on one side of us there's people playing Magic the Gathering with an intensity of like 12 angry men. It's like completely silent apart from really, really intensely looking at each other's cards, and it felt like if anyone made a wrong move, one of them was just going to swing for the other one. You know that tension where it feels like someone's going to get glassed in a pub? It was that, but over Magic the Gathering. Whereas us Pokemon players were just like, this is great fun, look at these funny characters. So that was my big weekend. No one gave me a scrap though, as I invited them to last week. Thank you for listening to VGC, a video game podcast, and thank you for watching it on YouTube. That went down very well. People were dying to see your bulging guns, Andy. Got a lot of good feedback from that.
I don't read the comments, mate.
It's all just saying
good bit of advice there for anyone.
But that's where the fun comes. You read the comments, pick a fight, ruin your night. That's the saying. That's every single night. Just try and make a massive argument out of nothing on X. You can follow VGC on Twitter, VGC_news. You can follow Andy on Twitter /X at AndyPlatonic, Chris at Chris_Dring, me at Jordan Midler. I don't know if you are keeping up with Blue Sky. I can't remember my password, so I am not on it, but you can find us on there too. Waited a month for an invite, signed up immediately, forgot my password. Thank you for watching. Thank you to Grant Kirkhope for the VGC podcast team. Say goodbye, Chris.
Goodbye.
Say goodbye, Andy.
See ya.
And we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching this episode. Remember, all new episodes of VGC, a video game podcast, will be posted to YouTube on Thursday. However, if you want the podcast slightly earlier in the day, you can get the audio feed on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next week.